2006, 3 documents were sealed in the Franklin State Prison Archives. A confession signed in mint-scented ink, a therapist's report about men who remembered crimes that they never committed, and a list of FBI badges that belonged to agents that never existed. What connected these documents would reveal something more terrifying than any murder. It was a system designed to make innocent men confess to crimes that they never committed. This is Brandon Smith's story. 5 years ago, I had a life that most people would recognize. A job stocking shelves at Wilson's Market, a small apartment above the laundromat, even a cat named Mouse. Then my mother got sick. Cancer, the kind that eats through your savings faster than it eats through the cells. I lost everything trying to save her, and in the end, I couldn't even afford a proper funeral. Now, 5 years later, hunger feels like an old friend. Always there, always gnawing. But the worst pain isn't the empty stomach or the dehydration that makes your tongue just feel like sandpaper. It's not having a place to rest your head at night. Sometimes I walk past my old apartment, and I look up at those windows, and I just remember what it felt like to have keys in my pocket, and a door that I could close against the world. Now, every single night is a gamble for shelter. Sometimes there's room at the hostel, but if they're full up, well then there's no other option but then just to lie down on the street. Now, I don't like sleeping in crowded areas, but there is safety in numbers. And if one person tries to attack you, then there will be others to call the police to tell them to back off. But one night, I really wanted some just peace and quiet. I mean, my anxiety was acting up, and I didn't want to be surrounded by other people. I found an alleyway between Madison and 4th that most people just would walk past without even seeing. And the buildings on either side still held the day's heat, and that overhanging wall would keep the rain off me. And steam hissed from the Chinese restaurant's vent above, carrying that scent of ginger and garlic that only made my hunger worse, but at least it masked the usual reek of piss and rotting cardboard. That night it was too quiet. I mean, usually you'd hear cats fighting over garbage, rats scurrying through the paper trash, distant sirens, but nothing. I mean, even the drunk stumbling out of O'Malley's bar seemed muted. Like someone had turned down the volume on the entire world. And that's when I should have known that something was really wrong. I mean, in my experience, silence in the city is never natural. I mean, it's always waiting for something just to break it. And I actually started just to drift off, though, and just get some sleep, until suddenly I felt like I was stuck to the ground. And like 2 men in suits were holding me down. And they placed duct tape over my mouth and my eyes. And before I was even properly taped up, I asked, what did they do? And they just quietly said, yeah, you know what you did. I was thrown into the trunk of their car. The trunk smelled like bleach and something metallic, like old pennies. And every bump in the road slammed my shoulder against something hard and cold. I mean, maybe it was a tire iron. Maybe it was something worse. I tried counting those turns, left and then right, left, but the throbbing in my head made it impossible to focus. The car's engine changed pitch as we left the city, and its hum dropping lower as we picked up speed, and that's when I realized that no one knew where I was. No one would even notice that I was gone. And before they carried me in, Thompson pulled something out of his pocket. It was a small leather pouch that clinked like it held coins, but when he opened it, I saw tufts of hair. It was different colors, different lengths, and he nodded to Whistler, who grabbed a fistful of my hair, yanked hard enough to make my eyes water, and Thompson added the torn strands to his collection, carefully like a botanist preserving a rare specimen. "Every confession needs evidence," he whispered, more to himself than to me. They dragged me across the concrete that felt damp under my feet, and then up these metal stairs that echoed no matter how quietly they stepped. The air changed. It became thick with dust and something else, something metallic. It just caught in the back of my throat. I mean, even through that duct tape, I could tell that we were somewhere old. We were somewhere forgotten. When they finally ripped the tape from my eyes, the fluorescent light above buzzed and flickered, painting everything in this sickly yellow pulse. The shadows it cast made the water stains on that ceiling look like dark continents on a diseased map. A single metal chair waited in the center of the room for me, its legs bolted to the floor. The screws were rusty, but the bolts looked new, like they'd done this all before, like they were just planning to do it again. I screamed as they ripped the duct tape off my mouth, and I was tied to that chair with the same two men in suits facing opposite me. And their suits were perfectly pressed, right? And their shoes were polished to a mirror shine. And later, I'd understood why. Monsters hide best in plain sight, wearing respectability like a second skin. The man on the left flashed a badge and said, "My name is Jack Thompson. I'm a former FBI agent, and this is my assistant, Tom Whistler. We don't work for the FBI anymore. We worked there for 10 years, but realized that we were merely cracking down on drug dealers and leaders of organized crime gangs, and we thought that our services would be better used targeting the real evils of society. People like you." Well, I asked them what I'd done, and they shook their heads and they just laughed. Thompson looked at me and he said, "We are vigilantes, and we are now citizens that track down evil people like yourself. We focus specifically on infanticide, or in simple terms, child killers like you." I could not believe that accusation that came my way. I told them that they've got the wrong guy, and Thompson just laughed and he said, "No, don't deny it. Don't waste your time. We know that it was you." Well, apparently they had evidence, and now they wanted to conduct a polygraph test. They said that they knew it was me, and this polygraph test was merely a formality. They asked me about the details of the case, and it was Wednesday evening, but I didn't know what day was Wednesday. I mean, it was 8:05 p.m., but I didn't carry a watch around with me, so I couldn't confirm or deny where I was at this time. Lindsay Murdoch was walking home from a netball practice. It was a long summer's day, so her parents allowed her to walk home alone, and they figured at 12 years of age, they would give her more independence. And it was by the wooded area by Pelham Hill. I knew about that place, but I don't think I'd ever been there. They claimed that I came from the woods and I dragged her in there. And they told me that I was a sick individual, that somehow I enjoyed it, and that taking someone else's life made me feel powerful. And they also told me that I did it for revenge, that since I became homeless, I had become bitter and resentful towards ordinary people, that deep down I wanted regular people to feel that same sense of anger and fear that I felt every day. You see, I wanted to tell him about Mrs. Chen at the laundromat, who still saved her empty cans for me, about the night shift worker at the gas station who sometimes, accidentally, would make an extra coffee. You know, not everyone saw right through me like I was made of glass. Some people still remember that I was human. I was deeply insulted by these accusations. Sure, I did not like being homeless, but I would never, ever succumb to such evil. And horrible behavior. And then I saw the polygraph. The polygraph needle scratched across that paper like insect legs, and Thompson, he leaned in close. I mean, his breath was smelling like mint gum and coffee. "Watch those lines," he said. "That's your guilt riding itself out." I stared at that zigzagging pattern until they seemed to form words. Guilty, guilty, guilty. And later, when Nathan told me that there was never any polygraph test, I realized that I'd been watching blank paper the entire time. And Whistler left the room during the test, but soon returned back. And he turned to Officer Thompson and he nodded and he said, "Yep, it's a perfect match." And then Thompson turned to me and he said, "Lindsay Murdoch's parents have been frustrated by the lack of urgency given to their case. The police would rather look into kids smoking weed, and the detectives officially assigned to this case, in our opinion, are out of their depth. So Lindsay's parents have hired us as private investigators, but you rest assured, we will be sharing everything with the police." I just kept on telling them that I was innocent, until Whistler banged his fist on the table, and he shouted at me and he said, "You need to stop lying. It's bad enough what you did. You just admit the truth." Whistler explained to me that they'd done DNA tests, that a hair was found on Lindsay's clothing that matches the DNA of one of my hairs. It was 100% match. The funny thing about memory, Whistler said, tapping his temple, is that it doesn't matter what you remember. What matters is what we can make you believe. And then he said, "We don't know how to tell you this, but your addiction has gotten the better of you. You don't remember what you done, do you?" Whistler wasn't wrong about my addiction. Most people think that people are homeless because they're addicts, but I actually became an addict because I was homeless. Life seemed too bleak, and this provided a brief escape. At the times I did use substances, it became a blank memory, but surely I could not have done that. Whistler told me that the evidence was stacked against me. He said, "The DNA evidence is a perfect match, and you failed the polygraph test miserably. You're a drug addict, so your memory is not reliable. But do you know what is reliable? Science." Whistler said, "You listen, there's gonna be a trial, and the prosecution are going to get a scientist to testify, and they're going to look at those hairs found on her body, and it's a perfect match. There were hairs on her body because she fought back, but you didn't expect that, did you, big guy? Lindsay was a brave little girl, and you took her life away, you sick freak." And Whistler adopted a more calming tone and said, "Hey, come on, look, I get it. You done something horribly wrong. But there's a way back from this, okay?" And I told Lindsay's parents, "Look, I can't bring Lindsay back, but I can get her justice. Justice that regular police just can't provide." And then Whistler looked me in the eye and he said, "Let's make the best of a very, very bad situation, shall we? The one thing that Lindsay's parents need is closure. They need some way of getting over this. And what you need at the moment is the shortest possible sentence. So if you plead guilty, then Lindsay's parents can finally try to move on, and you will be given a shorter sentence. If you show remorse, you might get parole after a decade or so, who knows? But this is the only way that I can see you getting out of this, to be honest." Yeah, well, I told them I don't think I did this. And they both looked at me like they were fed up with my lies and that I needed to come clean. And I sighed and I said, "Alright, look, maybe I did do it. Maybe I just was so disoriented that I would do something as sick as that. I don't know. The scariest part wasn't thinking I might have killed her. The scariest part was realizing how easy they could make me believe I had. And Thompson continued to look at me and he said, "Hey, listen, I know that deep down you're a good man, that you never meant to do any of this, but you need to be that good man now and you need to confess." And I swallowed my throat and I took a deep breath and I told them that I did it. Thompson and Whistler drove me down to the police station where I turned myself in and I confessed. They told me to go for a guilty plea where there was no trial, and I got 20 years. But 10 years later, I was walking through the prison yard and I noticed someone from the corner of the yard racing towards me, and it was Nathan. He was homeless too, and he really helped me out in the old days, so I went over to him and I said hello. And he went over and he looked like he wanted to speak to me urgently. "John," he said, "can you please tell me what you're in for? I won't judge." I told him the truth. I told him that I killed a little girl. "No, you didn't," he said. I asked what he meant. "I've been doing therapy and counseling at the prison, and I have done a lot of reading, and I think I know what's happened to you. I mean, what's happened to both of us. I've looked into your case 3 years before you got arrested. The same thing happened to me. You were abducted, you were taken to a different room, and here you were accused of killing someone." And I said, "Yeah, there were these private detectives, and they used to work for the FBI. And Nathan laughed, and he said, "Brandon, it still hasn't hit you, has it? These men are child killers. They kill children, and then they find people to confess for their sins. They're experienced manipulators, and they can get people to confess to anything. And even if you try to explain that to anyone, they'll think that you're insane. But there was no DNA evidence against you. There was no polygraph test. It's all lies. They made you confess. So there's no trial, and there's nobody that properly looked into the evidence." Nathan then shook his head and he said, "But you know what the worst thing of all of it is? That they're probably still out there." I spent 6 years in the prison library, researching every child murder case I could find, and the pattern, it was always the same. A child would disappear, and then weeks later, a homeless person would confess. The confession stopped in each city right after someone like me was convicted. It was like a dark wave was moving across the country, leaving broken families and imprisoned innocent men in its wake. And when I finally got my parole hearing in 2016, I tried to tell them everything about Thompson, about Whistler, about the fake polygraph, about all the other cases. And they said my story was fantastical and they denied my parole. But here's what keeps me awake at night. While I've been in here, the pattern of murders hasn't stopped. It's just moved to different cities. Different names, different faces. Every few months I read about another homeless man confessing to another child's murder. Sometimes I wonder if they used the same trunk, if they smelled the same mix of bleach and pennies, if they felt their shoulders slam against that same tire iron. I know one thing for certain. Somewhere out there, Thompson and Whistler are still hunting. They're still finding broken men like me, and they're still making us believe that we're monsters. And the real monsters, they're probably reading this story right now, and they're smiling at how perfectly their system works. But we have to know, have you heard about any strange confessions in your town? How many innocent men are sitting in cells right now, believing lies that were planted in their minds?
And for more scary horror stories, please subscribe.